Welcome to Living It Up with Lynette, and I am so glad that you're joining us today on this really, really important issue, and you're going to learn a lot of things today and a lot of things that you're going to think about. And I am thrilled to welcome our guest for today, Laura Katz Olson, and I read her book, I think in maybe 2 days. I just couldn't put it down. So Laura Katz Olson is a professor of political science and has taught at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania since 1974. She received her bachelor's degree from City College of New York and her PhD in political science from the University of Colorado, Boulder. Among her several courses, she teaches U.S. healthcare policies, the politics of healthcare, and the American presidency at the undergraduate and graduate levels. She also directs the Political Science Department's internship program. Laura has published 8 books on caring for the elderly. She also has written widely in the field of aging, healthcare, and women's studies, addressing such topics as Medicaid, Medicare, long-term care of the elderly, private pensions, and the Social Security system. In 2009, she received the Charles A. McCoy Lifetime Achievement Award from the New Political Science section of the American Political Science Association. And in 2012, Lehigh University's Williamson Award in Social Research for her book, The Politics of Medicaid. So on a personal note, Laura has a daughter, Alex, who is a performance poet, PhD candidate in political science at the University of Massachusetts, and mother of her adored grandson, Zinn. She also takes pleasure in grandchildren, Josh and Ellie. Laura lives with her husband, George, who is a bluegrass musician and a luthier. Did I say luthier correctly?
Yes.
Okay, it's a new word I just learned. So for those of you who don't know what luthier are, it's somebody who specializes in stringed instruments and fixing them?
Making them.
Making them. Okay, so I learned a new word today. So welcome, Laura. It is so wonderful to meet you in person. I'm honored.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So the first thing that I want to ask you is, this book is about your mom, Dottie, and your journey with her. And I noticed your book was finished, I guess, well, it was published in 2016. So I'm not sure when you actually finished it, but I'm just wondering, how is Dottie now? How is she doing?
My mother will be 95 years old in May, and she now has full-fledged dementia. I think it's Parkinson's dementia, which would be my guess.
Right.
So I still visit her every day, but the conversations are kind of limited.
Yeah, so you're continuing on this sad journey with your mom. She's still in the same place? She's still in the same
nursing home.
Their nursing home. Okay. So the just as a real quick recap, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I got from your book, the goals of you writing this book, and I got this from your paragraph, was to let caregivers know they are not alone, to help shed light on solutions, to shed light on the underlying problems in our American long-term service and support system, and to inform readers about the essential need for alternative approaches. Is that pretty much encapsulate what
yes,
you wanted to get
very
across?
much so.
Okay, that's what you wanted to get across. So we'll go through the journey, but the one question that I have to ask you is that you, in the beginning, are 43.5 million Americans assisting older people, with 5 to 7 million of these people being long-distance caregivers. And by 2030, the number of people over 65 should reach 75 million, or 20% of the U.S. total, compared to 13% today. So 20% of the U.S. total is going to be a caregiver, right? That's by 2030, which isn't that far away, right? So I guess my question that was just haunting me when I read this, why do you think that there is not more attention paid to this? it seems like the caregivers are a silent group of individuals suffering in silence and talking to each other, but there is really nobody advocating for them. I guess the AARP does to some extent, but
Now, there are advocates. There are groups advocating, but they're very limited and not terribly effective at this point.
right. And why do you think that is? Why do you think it is such a silent part? If so many people are experiencing it and so many more people are experiencing, why aren't we shouting from the rafters about this stuff?
Well, one of the problems, I think, is that to actually solve this problem would be hugely expensive.
Hmm.
And that is, in my opinion, the main reason that Obama left long-term care off the Affordable Care Act, because it would just add just billions and billions to the federal budget.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are silent because they think they're alone. They think they're the only ones. And people who are caring for an elder parent like yourself probably don't have the time to organize.
Mm-hmm.
It takes full-time effort of people, but there are groups advocating. They're just not very effective.
Yeah, you don't really hear about them. The amount of red tape that you experienced dealing with your mom along this every step of the journey, and you're a professional, and you knew this world, and you were highly educated in this and understood things. What happens to the people that don't have you as a daughter, or don't have children, or don't have somebody advocating for them? What happens to those people, do you think, those elderly people?
Well, I think it's much tougher for them. I think they go without a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I've taught this and written about it for a long time, and you can write down, and yes, there are bureaucratic hassles, but until you experience them, I don't think anyone understands how serious these are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many, not to get too political, which I am, but I think many of these hassles is to keep people from getting aid. The goal of the program is to keep as many people off as they possibly can, especially because the state pays a large part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And some states, like Florida, make it more challenging than some other states.
So do you think, so you talked to so many people along the way who were not helpful to you and didn't care really. Do you think they're just not given the information that they need to have, or they're just so overwhelmed by the amount of calls, or to protect themselves they have to detach? Because it's just, first of all, you had to get through to these people. And then when you actually got through to them, they were totally uncaring or unhelpful to you. Not everybody, but a lot of the people. Do you think they're just overwhelmed with the need?
I think that if you're talking about Medicaid or you're talking about Social Security, I think the phone lines are overwhelmed. I don't think the people at the other end are well trained.
Mm-hmm.
I found that many of them, like at the Veterans Department, in the Family and Children's Department of Florida, I don't think they didn't really know. First of all, they're not allowed to talk about specifics.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, they didn't know very much. And third, I think that they're very much detached from the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They're just people at the other end of the line. I was surprised. I have to admit that was one thing that really surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
How little they know and how incapable they were of doing more. I don't think they were mean people. I think they just couldn't do anymore.
Yeah, and I think you hit on such an important point, is that unless you're in this world, I do not think you can relate or know what it's like. And probably when you're in this world, it's too late. You're just in this world. So 20 or 21-year-old on the other end of the phone just doesn't get what you're going through. They just don't have that empathy towards what's going on. Or maybe if they did have the empathy, they still couldn't do anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the people at the other end of these phone lines really are distanced
Yeah.
from the actual issues.
Right.
It's not that they don't care. I think they're distant and they're at the bottom of the totem pole. So they have absolutely no ability to actually do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And every once in a while, you find somebody who really does want to help, and it's rare, but even they have trouble doing anything for you.
Right. Right. Your whole the whole discussion about your mom and trying to get home health care aides in, and first of all how expensive they are, and then there's 4-hour minimums and that whole industry. So that's the same thing. Yeah, I'm calling you from New Jersey, and it's very similar. It's generally a 3 or 4 hour minimum that you're going to get people. But I just want to share this with you. So we had aides come in with my mother also, and the billing was always wrong. That she was not always, but often wrong, where I paid and they billed me for what I had already paid for. And so I started thinking, like, is this like a real nutsy conspiracy theory? Like, the people that they're sending the bills to probably can't check or don't have the faculties. I checked my checkbook and I was able to say, please check this. But it was so interesting to me that you had the same experience with the billing.
Oh, I spent so much time checking on billing and being double billed and triple billed. And I spent a lot of time on the phone trying to untangle that. That was really tough. And that's what we were paying.
Yeah, right.
This wasn't through Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. In retrospect, when you look back along this journey with your mom, do you wish you would have moved her from Florida, Pennsylvania earlier in your?
That's a good question. The one thing I've learned, and I learned this from my mother-in-law as well, is you can't move somebody on your own. So yes, my mother would have been better off had she moved earlier, but she wouldn't have gone. My mother-in-law she died at 102 and stayed in her home until she was 101 because she refused to leave. My husband couldn't make her go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the good news and the bad news. I mean, the good news is that it gives agency to older people not to be forced into a place they don't want to be. The bad news is that it's dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the lessons that I learned in my job as working with caregivers and older people and trying to keep them independent is, when you can, move by one of your kids. That's advice I give. If your kids will have you by them, right? If you have that sort of relationship where you could live by one of your kids, not with them per se, but just in that neighborhood. Move when you can because you're going to need an advocate at one point in your life. Whether you think you're not, it'll live long enough, you're going to need an advocate. And so go by where your kids are when you can, and you still can get involved in things.
Well, see, that was one of the problems that I had. One, my mother had absolutely no money. There was no assets.
Yeah.
No, the only income she had was from Social Security, which was very little, and no assets. She was in public housing for the elderly, which was affordable for her. To move her to Pennsylvania and into public housing, she had to be a resident. And if I gave my address as a resident, she would have lost her Florida residency and her housing there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a waiting list for Pennsylvania. So we came into that catch-22 because I did want to move her into public housing.
It is a catch-22. So let's back up a little bit. Tell us about, I talked about the goals of your book and why you wrote the book. Tell us a little bit about your mom when she was younger, because she really does sound like a character when she was younger. And then, just sort of like what you went through along the way, like really, what your book is really talking to about what happened.
Well, my mother was a very independent type of person, very typical of her generation. She got caught up into marriage and kids and gave up some of her individuality. When my father died, you could see the individuality much better.
Mm-hmm.
She became the person she used to talk about when she was younger.
Yes.
My mother was very athletic. She won gold and silver medals in bicycle racing, in swimming, and basketball. I have one of her medals here.
Ah, that's great.
And she basically used her bicycle for transportation. She couldn't really afford a car, but I had bought her a car. She didn't use it very much. And when she was still working, she'd use her bicycle to go to work. She'd bike maybe 60 miles a day. She was hugely athletic. And one day she said, her bike is not steady, and she didn't know what was going on. And very slowly, she became incapable of riding. And soon, her walking became a problem, and we had a very hard time figuring out what was wrong with her.
Yeah. And you lost your two sisters, correct? And how old were you? Like, did they help out at all in this, or they were gone by the time you had to take on the caregiving duties?
Well, my middle sister died when my mother was still fine.
Okay.
And my little sister died when my mother was just beginning to go through this.
Okay, so you were really on your own in this.
Yes.
You were really on your own. And you talk so poignantly about being split, like you had a daughter still, you have your career, you had your husband, and then you had this on top of it, and just trying to juggle all those balls while you were dealing with this. How did you manage that? How did you function?
Mostly on remote control.
Yeah.
But I'm very lucky. I'm blessed with a job where you can take more time off. I could take a long weekend if I taught on Tuesday and Thursday, and I would, fly out to my mother and do what I needed to do for 4 days and then fly back. I can't imagine how anybody could do it who has stricter hours.
Right.
Like in my job, I could work all night. I could work any time I want. I could always make up for physically being there. So.
Right. Yeah. You really don't, you don't have a lot of self-pity, in your book. You really just sort of forge ahead. But I was struck, you do have a paragraph about, when you did break it down, that the one time when you allowed yourself to have those emotions. I don't know. Would you be okay if I read that paragraph? That just spoke to my heart. So this is on page 70 of Elder Care Journey, A View from the Front Lines. And you wrote, "Tears unwittingly appeared at the corner of my eyes. Trickling at first, they soon started to gush out uncontrollably, like a rain-swelled dam that had finally burst. Muffled sobs racked through my whole body for a long while. Until this evening, I had not really had a good cry over what was happening to her, to us. Perhaps I was finally mourning the loss of the person my mother had been. Maybe I was just tired of being in charge and wanted my mommy back. Or could it be both? I poured myself a glass of white wine. That just, I, that, that just like completely spoke to my heart. That was, but that's really, you don't have a lot, like you don't wallow in this book or feel sorry for yourself. But I just think like tired of being in charge and wanting your mother back.
Well, that's actually something I've been thinking about more and more. Like, as my mother just sits there in her chair and communicates by babbling, because she is in full-blown dementia right now. I was just thinking, like, what kind of mother was she? And I was thinking about her as a mother. And I don't know if you go through that, but it's like, how could I not have a mother and yet she's still there?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I once was going out with my husband. I had a work event at night, and I was going out the door, and at that point, my mother couldn't be left alone, so we had somebody over to watch her while we went out. And the aide said to me, "You know, it's chilly out. You need to put on a coat." And it was like that she was being a mother to me, and I didn't realize how much I missed having a mother until she said that. Like a little thing like that. I was like, because my mother would have said that.
That's interesting, yeah.
She would have said, you know, you need to, it's cold tonight, put on a coat, or what coat are you wearing, or whatever. But the aide said it, and I was like, wow, I miss having a mother. Just a little thing like that struck me with that.
Yeah, and I think someone like you has your mother in your house, it is much more difficult, because I've learned to go to do what I need to do, to give her love, empathy, feed her, whatever I need to do for her. But when I leave, I close the door, because I could not think about what she's going through all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think if she was living with me, I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, it's hard.
Go.
Yeah, I think everybody has their individual challenges. Like when I read your book, I was thinking, oh my God, I don't know how I could have done this. And then I hear, you know, people call me all the time, and they're going through their own things, and everybody just thinks they're in their own little world. And not to get too political, but I think this is really critical for people to hear. There is a shortage of aides. Where I am, there's a very large percentage of elderly people, and you cannot get aides. Like people are on waiting lists. Have you thought about, I'm sure you've thought about it, but the current administration's policies on home health care agency executive directors and things, and they're really worried because a lot of the aides are coming from other countries. Have you thought about the implications of the immigration policies on the aid shortage and what people should know about that?
Yes, I think there's a great deal of misunderstanding about immigrants, both legal and illegal, because many immigrants, not just from Mexico, but from the Caribbean and other places, serve as caregivers, not just for the elderly, but many of them are taking care of children for families where both people have very intensive full-time work.
Mm-hmm.
And they serve a great service too as caregivers. They are paid very, very little. They have no benefits for the most part. And that is why American workers don't want those jobs.
Exactly.
And
Right.
there's other jobs like that where you have immigrants. I think that the Trump administration really has no sense of how our workplace needs immigrants.
Yeah, it's a scary prospect. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I really want to talk about this. So the midterm elections are coming up, November 2018, and caregiving and long-term care and solutions are not really an issue that people are talking about. There's so many other issues going on in the world. But when caregivers are going out to select whoever they want to vote for, Democratic or Republican, when they're evaluating where that potential representative stands on these issues, is there certain questions they should be asking, or is there a certain policy that they should be looking at? I think this is only going to change in the United States if our representatives see this as an issue that they want to find solutions for. So what advice do you have to caregivers out there, not going Democratic or political, but when they're evaluating their potential, who they're going to pull the lever for, what should they be looking for?
Well, I think unfortunately, as you said, neither Republicans or Democrats have been very good with this issue of caregiving. They don't seem to, it's not even on the agenda.
Right.
So I think that we need to organize people who, not obviously not the people who need caregiving, because they can barely take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that caregivers need to organize much more effectively. Art, for example, caregiving is like a really very minor part of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be some kind of state, and the problem is caregiving is also funded mostly at the state level. So you have to go to 50 states, and it's huge. As I said in the very beginning, the big problem is to solve this would be hugely expensive.
Yeah.
And we're now trying to defend even basic minimal health care for universal health care. And when you get on the defensive for health care, it's hard to then expand it and say, oh, by the way, we also want universal long-term care. But
Yeah.
I think the issue has to be raised. I think it has to be turned into an agenda item.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, and I honestly, I think one of the problems is that they view it as a woman's issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Caregivers tend to be women.
You're right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think we have to raise voices, men and women, in town hall meetings. We have to raise that as a question. What's your ideas for solutions of this? And I think part of the problem, again, getting it back to the beginning, is unless you experience this, you don't know how awful it is. And I think most of the elected officials probably have other options that are available to them, so that they're not experiencing this, and the people in their circles are not experiencing it. So they don't know what it's like, because you don't know how awful it is until you have to deal with this. So I think that's part of the problem too. They're not going to experience it in their lives. They're going to have solutions. So I think it makes it more complicated also. But is there anything else you wanted, because we have to wrap it up, is there anything else you wanted to share with me or our audience, or anything as we close out the last few minutes?
Well, the issue is very complicated. Like, we were talking about how essential immigrants are to the long-term care system. But we also have to remember that they are underpaid and overworked.
Yes.
So in addition to needing more caregivers, we also need to increase the money they make, and their benefits. Their control maybe over the workplace would give them more satisfaction.
Yeah.
And if you made a job that was decent,
mm-hmm.
in terms of quality and pay and benefits, then perhaps you would have more caregivers.
Yeah.
I'm always concerned when a nursing home says, I'm sorry, but I can't find anybody.
Yeah.
And my argument is you can't find anybody because you're not paying them enough.
Right. Right. There has to be a paradigm shift in this country as far as the value of aides and people working in nursing homes. They're just not respected, awful working conditions, and it just continues and continues and continues and continues. It's such a huge issue in this
It's a
country.
very, very, very challenging job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I want to thank you. I want to encourage people. I'm going to hold it up. I don't know if this is going to make sense, but this is the book that we're talking about. It's called Elder Care Journey, A View from the Front Lines. It is by Laura Katz Olson. If you are a caregiver, if you are going through this, if you're thinking your parents are getting older and you're going to have to face this in the next few years, I highly recommend this book. It's an honest journey of what you've gone through, raises really important issues. I don't know how you can keep quiet after reading this book. This is going to make you want to speak up, and it really raises the issues. And I thank you for writing this and raising this issue, and good luck with you.
And thank you so much. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, I have we could talk an hour about AIDS. I have such an issue with this, but we're out of time. So maybe you'll come back another time and we could talk about this, because this is so critical.
It would be my pleasure.
And I really enjoyed your book. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
Okay. All right. Good luck with everything.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.